of the historic district or historic Newton walks, and we've modified it a bit, first of all, so it's not quite so long, and we primarily want to hit the institutions in the area, and so if you just follow the dark arrows, you will see where we are. And the numbers, I will refer to them when we're talking, so you will be able to follow the map as far as the numbers. But you will notice the bottom half, we just aren't going that far. Although there are some beautiful places there, I encourage you to walk over there when you can. So Larry's going to start with some history of Auburndale, general history.
Well, for those of you who are outside Newton, quick history of Newton, which I'll cover in about 30 seconds. Newton was originally part of Cambridge. And Cambridge was the General Court basically chartered Cambridge in 1632, about 2 years after the Puritans came to Boston. What was then Cambridge then included Newton, Brighton, Lexington, portions of Lincoln, and Bedford. The first resident in Auburndale is thought to be a guy by the name of William Robinson. He built a house in 1678 over on the other side of the Pike, Macomb Ave, in what is now Freeman Street.
Where's what?
Now Freeman Street. His grandson, William Robinson II, built a house in around 1724. It'll be the first house on our stop, and it is the oldest house still in existence in Auburndale today. Most of this area was farmland until the 1840s. In 1830s, the Boston and Worcester Railroad went from Boston and actually got to Worcester by 1835. In 1843, the Boston and Worcester Railroad introduced season passes for $60 a year, thereby introducing the era of commuter rail. So Newton Corner, West Newton, Auburndale were amongst the first commuter rail suburbs in the country. Newton Lower Falls and Newton Upper Falls are both older. They were mill communities that were organized around manufacturing at those falls. In 1847, the Reverend Charles McGuire Pigeon bought land of what is now known as Pigeon Hill. Pigeon Hill is across the Cell Bridge here and off to your left, on a knoll overlooking the Charles, and he started subdividing the land. And obviously, once the commuter rail was available, all Newton Corner, West Newton, and Auburndale all became places desirable to live for people who wanted to get out from the crowded cities. In 1851, there are three institutions that we were going to cover today. One is here, the United Parish of Auburndale, which used to be the Congregational Church. LaSalle College, which began as Auburndale Female Seminary, then became LaSalle Female Seminary. It was started in 1851. It is older than all of the seven sister schools except for Mount Holyoke. In fact, it's one of the 12 first colleges for women in the country. And I think it was the first junior college in the country. just backing up a minute, it was Charles Pigeon who actually named Auburndale, 2 words, Auburndale. Because he had gone to Harvard and spent a lot of time at the Mount Auburn Cemetery. So Auburndale is essentially named after Auburndale, Mount Auburn Cemetery. The third institution besides United Parish and LaSalle is the Walker Home. The Walker Home started in 1870 as a home for missionary children. Miss Eliza Walker, whose father, Reverend Harding, was also a reverend, and her husband went to Turkey in 1853 as missionaries. They had 6 children there, 2 of whom died. And then her husband died in 1866, and she returned here with her 4 children. Her father built her a house, which we will mention as we pass, and within 10 years she had 24 children living with her who were sons and daughters of missionaries that had gone around the world. When we get the Walker Home is our last stop, so we'll talk about it more when we get there. So basically a lot of Auburndale was built in the period between 1847 and 1900. Around 1900, the streetcar arrived out Commonwealth Avenue to the Charles River. It was at that time that Norumbega Park was built. Norumbega Park was a trolley park that the trolley line built in order to attract people out to this area on weekends. So on weekends, there were tens of thousands of people that would come out from Boston to Norumbega Park, Riverside Park, which had a pool, and basically this was a place to have fun at the turn of the century. It's said that there were more than 5,000 canoes on the Charles between Lower Falls and the dam at Waltham. And one of the reasons canoeing was so popular is the only place a young man and a young woman could be together without a chaperone.
4,000 other canoes. That's irrelevant.
And supposedly kissing was not, you could be fined $20 for kissing. Kissing, $20 is a lot of money at those days. But how they enforce that, I don't know. I mean, that would be a little difficult with the 5,000 canoes.
This is where canoodling.
Well, you know, I wondered whether that term came from there, but I couldn't find anything to support that, although it makes sense to me.
The Historical Society says that's where it started.
Really?
That doesn't,
Canoodle, yeah.
no, that
Means it must be true.
Somebody ought to get on Wikipedia. He thought it just meant communicated.
That too.
So he talked about canoodling with his fellow newscasters.
Got himself into trouble.
Anyway, in 1915, the Walker Home, instead of being a home for missionary children, became a retirement home for missionaries. So its basic purpose changed. And today,
What
it
year
is
was that?
1915. By 1990, I think there were only 3 missionaries still living there. So today, it's called Walker Home for Ecumenical Exchange, the Walker Center for Ecumenical Exchange. And there are basically couples living there who go to the various religious schools in and around Boston. So there are people from all over the world living there. In 1989, when the incident in Tiananmen Square happened, we had bands all over the place out in front of Walker Home because that was one of the few places that had any direct communication with China. So that basically sums up the basic history of Auburndale. Here we'll move on to
Well, we're going to stay at the Auburndale, at the United Parish here for a couple of minutes. And the United Parish was formed as the Congregational Society of Auburndale in 1850. They rented space from the Educational Society of Auburndale, and that had been started in 1849. And later on, in 1857, the Auburndale Congregational Society and the Congregational Church of Auburndale combined. They were able to raise enough money to design this church, and Charles Edward Parker was the architect of it. He lived from 1826 to 1890, and he designed our home, which is number 7 Williston, which we will see on the tour. He designed a chapel for the Church of the Messiah, and that was his home church. He designed the former Boston Society of Architects building on Broad Street. They have moved very recently. He designed some buildings at Amherst College and many other buildings in Boston that unfortunately were lost during the, I think it was 1872 fire in Boston. As far as history of this church, it's one of the only remaining mid-19th century wood churches in Newton, and it has Romanesque detailing on a federal meeting house plan. The total cost of the property, including the church construction, tower, furnishings, and grading, was $12,796. And
Say $20 fine. This is a lot of money.
so this is the original part of the church, obviously, what you see on the fieldstone and granite block foundation. The main facade, we'll take a walk in just a second on our way out to see the main facade on Hancock Street. That is the west facade, and in Romanesque architecture, that is generally the location of the entrance. This is a 3-stage tower with a square base, and it's topped by a polygonal spire, and it has slate shingles. The main field is of scallop shingles, and then it's decorated with diamond shingles in a different color. This actually is the second steeple because the first one blew down during a storm, and the second one was also designed by Charles Edward Parker. The bell that is here came down through the roof during that storm, and it was not harmed. The bell.
You mean the hurricane or what's that?
I'm sorry,
36?
I
Oh.
don't know which, yeah, well, it would have been much earlier than that because Charles Edward Parker designed the second spire, so,
3 years later.
yeah.
Oh, recently.
But the bell weighs 3,500 pounds, and it was a gift of Charles Burr, who you all know from the name of Burr School. He spent $1,100 on that gift, and the bell was made at the Henry N. Hooper Company of Boston in 1857. I have been told that there are not many wood churches that have bells anymore, just because the weight and the movement wears on the wood and the structure, and UPA has reinforced this tower, so we will be able to hear the bell for many years to come. This is also the second clock. This was moved from the Hollis Street Church in Boston, and it was made in Worcester in 1812. Enlargements have been made to the building in 1946 and 1963. The 1963 remodeling was done by Tetsu Tanayanaki, who many of you may know. He is an Auburndale resident. And the final addition down there, which includes that entry and then also chapel in the back, was designed by another local architect, Sam Streebert. And you will notice that some of the windows, the stained glass windows, were actually moved. 2 churches combined, this church and the Centenary Methodist Church on Central Street. When they combined, the church became the United Parish of Auburndale. And the building is now used as, I think, housing and maybe community center, and there are a few other functions there. But they did bring the stained glass windows over here, so they're in the entry and in the new chapel. I should mention these stained glass windows are not the original windows in the building. In, I believe it was 1907, they were brought in here, and the original windows were just plain glass. So now we'll start, well, let's take a peek quickly around the corner, just at the entry, so you can see the nice detail around across the LaSalle Bridge. And it is named LaSalle Bridge, of course, because we are near the school, but also during the construction of the turnpike, the school, on their property, there was an esker down by Haskell Pond, and that an esker is a glacial formation of sand and gravel, and a lot of that was taken for the turnpike construction, and LaSalle benefited financially from that, and then they were also benefited from having the bridge named after them. So we will continue now to the
This is the oldest house still in existence in Auburndale. It was built in 1724 by William Robinson II. It was later sold to this man Whittemore, who opened it as a tavern. I think it is still in use today as a two-family. It's basically a house that is framed much like this. It's all heavy timber construction. Post and beam. They didn't have nails in this day, were very hard to come by. Most of them came from England. So almost everything is mortise and tenon or wood pegs. This one does not have the central chimney. It has two chimneys instead of one. But like most houses of its day, it faces south. And that it's only really one room deep. And the reason for that is to let light into the house. With no electricity and no gas lighting, you had to take advantage of sunlight as best you could. I think.
Notice the wooden downspout.
Yeah.
Oh my.
Actually, I hadn't noticed that myself. Thank you for pointing that out. It was operated as a tavern as early as 1764. John Pigeon purchased the house in 1773. John Pigeon was the man who developed Pigeon Hill. And before Auburndale was known as Auburndale, it was known as Pigeonville. But thankfully, he named it Auburndale, which I'd be happy that we're not living in Pigeonville. I should also point out that down the street is the Plummer Library, which used to be part of the Newton Library system. And down Ash Street is the Corpus Christi Church, which in 1956 won the Boston Society of Architects Harold Smith Parker Medal for being the most beautiful architecture in Boston in that year. We're not going to go down there, but if you're interested in going to look at it, you can go see it later.
This is 33 Woodland, and on your maps, this is number 2. And I'm going to start around. This is an example of Greek revival, and I'll start. I'm sorry.
Are we in the historic district?
Yes, we are. In fact, thank you for noticing. We are right in front of the historic district sign, and we actually are members of the LaSalle Neighborhood District, LaSalle Neighborhood Association, and we did put up those signs for the historic district for the city of Newton. We gave them to them, and the city of Newton did install them for us, and we're very thankful about that. Many of us worked tirelessly to make this historic district, and I hope you will see why as we walk around. There are examples of
When was this built?
the historic district or this
No,
house?
this house.
Well, this house dates from 1848. And we will be seeing, as I mentioned, this is Greek revival. We'll see Italianate, mansard, stick style, Queen Anne, shingle style, and colonial revival as we go around. I'll try to point them out.
There's some confusion as to which house we're looking at now.
This one right here behind us is 33 Woodland.
No, it's from the tree. It's a tree.
I'm sorry, it's 2 on your map. The circle number on your map is 2, and that's the house we're looking at. The house across the street is not identified on the map, but we will talk about it in a minute. This house was the house of Ebenezer Bradbury, who was a lawyer, a justice of the peace, and school committee member. It is on the National Register, and it has Greek revivals such as the end gable. It is an end gable house. You enter on the end, and it has a side wall entrance. Bold corner posts with a raking cornice and returns at the top. In the Greek revival, many buildings have a pediment that goes straight across, but these are just at the corners. It has a full width open porch with ionic columns, and the fretwork you see is wood, but it was styled after a lot of the ironwork in Cambridge at the time. Now,
Would that have been added after the house?
oh yes, actually there is an addition to the house, and it's on the side. Maybe when we go past the driveway, you will see that. That was added, I believe, in about 1988.
But I mean, was the fretwork original to the date of the house being built? Because it looks sort of Victorian.
I do not
don't
have that
know.
information.
The addition, I might add, was designed by Caroline, or to the left.
It looks very.
It's, the addition includes a dining area that has it's a hexagonal structure, and then there's a mudroom entrance in the back. It's
One other thing is, this guy had 21 children, so I don't know where they all slept.
Yeah.
It is a big house, but
It's doubtful that the house was built with colonial windows. It was probably Victorian windows, single pane, above and below. I think those were added on. I'm sure that.
well,
most
And
of
it
these
wouldn't
houses,
have had round columns, they were too hard to make. So it would have had square columns on the porch.
thank you. The house across the street, and I've just passed out a couple more photographs. The first ones were of Greek revival. This next one is of Queen Anne, and this is a Queen Anne house across the street, 32 Woodland. It is not really shown on your map, but it's obviously opposite this one. It was the J. Walker Davis house. He was a musician. Queen Anne houses were not symmetrical. They were made to be picturesque. It has a veranda that goes around the front of the house, a lovely tower, and these people renovated the house, I would say, between 10 and 15 years ago. It had aluminum siding. The tower had vertical aluminum siding, and they've really done a tremendous job of restoring the detail.
Were the shingles, are those shingles the original shingles? They just put the one over it?
I don't know if the shingles were under the siding. I mean, they probably were, but I imagine they had to replace some of them. So, while we're standing here, I'm going to mention another house we'll see down the street, but,
What's the date of this house?
oh, I'm sorry, this is dating from 1885. Down at the corner near the United Parish again, there's a yellow house. It's 59 Woodland, and it's the Isaac Worcester house that dates from 1848. It's a Greek revival. It is a plain side gable house with wide corner pilasters, a frieze, and eave returns. and peaked window lintels over the window sash. It was modified in the 1870s and 80s with a single-story projecting bay in each gable end and a projecting oriel window over the stairs on 4 fluted square pillars. And last year, more additions on there was a dormer added on the south side of the house, which you won't see from this point of view, but when we turn that corner, you can see it. So now we're going to go.
What was it, Bill?
This was built in 1848, the yellow house. So now we'll go down to the corner again and pass by the United Parish and go on to Grove Street. We are now at 73 Grove Street, and not to embarrass one of our residents here, but this is the house of Lynn Goldsmith and Richard Alfred, and they've done a tremendous amount of work over the years. And this house is a Queen Anne dating from 1887. It was on a tour, the house tour, in 2006. The Darling family had owned a hardware store in Boston, and a lot of the original hardware in the house dates from when they lived here. This was constructed in 1887 by Charles Darling as a present for his wife Elizabeth Sweet. She actually lived in the house across the street growing up. And there are carvings on the mantel in the parlor that symbolize that this was a wedding gift for her. Oh, I'm sorry, this is not necessarily noted on your map, but it is about in the middle of Grove Street. So in the early 60s and 70s, a lot of the architectural detail was not appreciated as much as it is now, and the previous owners had painted the whole house a dark green with the black tower. And I don't know if they were the ones that removed the panel, but I know that you have
replaced the panel, right? We had a picture from the 1895 where you could see, this is not exact because you couldn't see it right now, but it's very close in design.
Yeah, I remember it took you a year. I don't know if that was tracking down somebody to make it, or...
Well, we found somebody, but then we did a lot of other work on the house, and then
I
we
see.
got back to that.
Well, if you didn't hear her, Lynn mentioned that they had photographs, 1895 photographs of the house, and the panel was gone, but they knew they wanted to replace it. It's not an exact replica because from the kind of fuzzy old photographs you couldn't tell the amount of detail, but they did have an artist replicate it and put it up, a few years ago.
A couple of years
Yeah.
ago.
And
There was a widow's walk on the house as well. That's kind of the one thing that we have not done yet.
oh, we're waiting. All right. But inside, they have done a tremendous amount of work as well, and it's just restored quite close to the period with Morris wallpapers and...
It's an Eastlake Queen Anne Victorian, so it's of the style of Charles Eastlake, who was a designer of the late 1800s, American.
Right.
So,
Thank you.
you know, one thing, the house across the street always interested me because they said there was a big addition to it, and I never could figure out what the addition was until I did a tour, and it turns out there's a kind of small farmhouse in the back,
and
the addition is this whole front.
Oh, no way. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it has 4 very large rooms, and when you compare it to the back of the house, which is like farmhouse style. That's
Very
now belongs
interesting.
to the sale. Yeah.
Now, the date that I have for that house, 74 Grove Street, and that was the house where, was it Elizabeth Sweet had grown up. And it was named for its owner, Charles Sweet. And they were in banking and finance. It was completely remodeled and updated at the turn of the century, so maybe that's... Yeah. And,
Century.
Oh, I would say the 20th century, yeah. And then you can see modillion blocks, deep entrance porch on clusters of Tuscan columns. And I don't know where this is, the piazza. with a balustrade. Maybe that's in the back. I read about that and I do not know where it is. But when we pass by, maybe some of you will see it. Also, while we're standing here, I'll mention 60 Grove Street. That's a shingle-style house. So this is 74, so 60 is down a few. And it was designed in 1896. And it was the Dr. Mortimer Clark house. Some believe that architect William Goodwin designed it. He lived on Chestnut Street. But others think that it is reminiscent of Rand's work, and we will see an example of architect Rand's work on Groveland Street. Now, I'll just mention while we're here, Abijah Johnson had a lot to do with this community. He was one of the founders of the Auburndale Congregational Church. He was involved in the beginning of LaSalle Female Seminary, and he was a developer, and he did lay out Grove Street. This was known as Linden Street originally. He laid out Hancock Street, that was known as Forest Avenue. And he's responsible for about 20 houses in this area. And as we get closer to some of the houses, we will be seeing, there's another house down here, 49 Grove, where we will stop. It's the Nye Park Inn, and we'll talk a little more about Abijah Johnson. Okay. So this is 49 Grove Street, the Nye Park Inn, and it dates from 1849. It was built by Abijah Johnson. He was actually known for building very simple houses, so a lot of this detail has been added. It was a hotel in the 19th century and then became apartments in the 20th century. Now it is condominiums. It has very steep gables, Queen Anne features that were added, tall corbelled chimneys that probably date to a 19th century renovation. In 1910, it was rotated 90 degrees on the site so that central terrace could be constructed. So this facade used to be over there. After World War II, there had been a memorial to Auburndale servicemen constructed in the Nye Park, which was very close to this. And also, we're passing around a photograph of the Auburndale train station. That is number 36 on your map. And that was very close to here. That was in the Nye Park park. Then there was also, when we were on Hancock Street, there had been a park. I'm sorry?
Designed by H.H. Richardson.
Yes, thank you. And then on Hancock Street, there was also a park named Burr Park, and both the parks, the station, and 30 Auburndale homes were razed to construct the turnpike when it came through in the 1960s, I think 1962. So I actually don't have the date on that house. I imagine across the street, just to take a peek at it, I believe it's late 1800s. I would call it Queen Anne. But we are going to go to the very next house that is the Brown house down there. And, pardon me?
I remember that from the house.
That was definitely on the house tour as well, 2006. Beautiful. Some of you know the owners of this house, Linda Sherman and Ralph Johnson. They are not here today, but they have done a tremendous job with this house also. It was on the historic Newton house tour in 2006, and if you've seen the interior, some of you have, it is absolutely gorgeous. The design, it was constructed in 1909, yes, and it was done in accordance. It was done in accordance with Gustav Stickley's design number 10 from his Craftsman magazine series in 1905. and I believe they do have plans with actually Stickley's comments written on them. The owner was Edward Hammond, and he had a love of shingle-style homes because they spent a lot of time up in Maine, and so he was inspired to build this house from that. It's an example of arts and crafts style. They modified the design a bit from the plan called for 5 bedrooms. They did 4, and they enlarged the master bedroom and kitchen. The Hammonds were the first owners and lived here till 1970. The Sherman Johnsons are the second owner and very much still here today. There are stone walls around the property that the Hammonds brought here from Maine, and she was a horticulturist, and she had wonderful gardens and so many fountains and such that when that was turned on, evidently the water pressure in the rest of the neighborhood went down. Of course, the shingle style features are the steep gable roof and the pair of tall chimneys and the wood shingles. We can, after this, we'll talk about another house across the street, but we can go down in the back and take a look at the gardens for a couple of minutes. But I do encourage you to move quickly when we do that. First of all, 34 Grove, well, I think the first house was 40 Groveland, which is over here. That is thought to be constructed by George Rand, and 34 Groveland, directly across the street, was constructed by George Rand, who was an architect and principal of Rand and Taylor. They did a lot of suburban architecture, but they worked out of Boston. That is a shingle-style house dating from 1902. It has a sweeping gambrel roof with cropped eaves, a molded cornice, and a frieze that has a shed dormer and an eyebrow dormer. It's an important feature of the house is this 2-story window panel above the stair and a 2nd-story rounded arch window. And I don't know if you can see that from here. You might have to stand on the side. Through the trees. I will also mention, while we're right here, 59 Maple Street, which is way down at the corner. And that is the William Crane House. He was an actor. It was built in 1896 and is an example of colonial revival. It has a broad hipped roof, symmetrical facade, and a spacious centered entrance porch, and 12/1 sash. So let's meet back here. I really want you to stay all together, but let's take a quick look in the back, and maybe you might want to take a look at that house across the street, and then we'll move on again. I'll just mention this is 59 Maple Street running this way. And I did mention it before, but a well-known architect and architectural photographer, Steve Rosenthal, lived there for many, many years. And he had his studio in the carriage house. So these people have also taken very good care of the house. So LaSalle is, I don't know if you can see the newer buildings behind me, possibly looking through. It's quite a large area, so we're not really going to walk through it all. But this is Winslow Hall right here, and I will try to point out a few more of the buildings as we go up the street. Edward LaSalle was born in 1809. He was educated in public schools and at Williams College, and became an instructor there and taught chemistry for about 20 years. He traveled extensively and lectured, and in 1851 he was visiting Holyoke Female Seminary as a lecturer. And he was very inspired by what he saw there and felt that the school was doing a lot of good. And Larry mentioned Holyoke was the first
First of the Seven Sisters Boys, yeah.
Yeah, and so he was looking to set up a school similar to that, and there was a syndicate of 22 men in Auburndale here who put up some money and wanted to have a female seminary of, quote, the highest order in their area. They supplied the capital and got LaSalle to put the school together. His brother Josiah and his brother-in-law George W. Briggs joined him, and 6 months after the school opened, Edward LaSalle died of typhoid, but his brother and brother-in-law carried on as principals of the school. Later, they named the school after Edward LaSalle. There is a link among all the institutions here in the neighborhood, and the girls who went here, the young women, they were required to go to Sunday worship at the church twice on Sunday, every Sunday. The first year that the church was finished was the first time that the LaSalle Female Seminary had their commencement in the church, the United Parish of Auburndale, where we started. Yeah, actually, if you're looking on your map, we're in the area just about the center of the map that says LaSalle, and there are a number of buildings in this area that we could talk about. Actually, the architect Charles Edward Parker, who I mentioned before, designed the United Parish of Auburndale. He married Isabel Jennings, who was an 1857 poet of the class, and their son Horatio Parker is a well-known composer of particularly an oratorio, which I have the name of. We'll talk about that in another place. But at the time that this school was built, there were no four-year colleges for women. The focus on education for women was social and not academic. But LaSalle put together an academic department and a collegiate department, one part of it being more high school oriented and the other being more collegiate, college level. They did have classes in geography, English, arithmetic, Latin, French, music, history, and a range of sciences. And they attracted students from all over the United States. Many of the young women were courted by Harvard students. Bragdon was another principal of the school after they put together a board of trustees, as well as they brought in Charles Bragdon. He expanded the facility, he expanded the faculty, and LaSalle became renowned as an academically rigorous women's institution, a prestigious finishing school with highly scientific approach to domestic work, art and music, an innovative, radical approach to women's education for the time. Bragdon also administered Harvard exams and surprised quite a few people when the young women of LaSalle did quite well on them. Bragdon was also in charge when LaSalle was awarded a medal at the World's Columbian Exhibition in Chicago in 1893. And the school maintained a display in the women's building at the fair. That brought more interest to the school and the need for expansion. And we will pass later on, there was a building named after Bragdon Hall. It was demolished in 1974. Guy Winslow was the first president of LaSalle. I guess up to that point they had been called principals. He led the school for 40 years, and his son, Donald Winslow, just passed away a couple of years ago. He had written a book about LaSalle, a history of the first junior college for women, published by LaSalle in 1987. Guy Winslow, in his time, the enrollment went from 161 to 531 in 1947. The expansion was accomplished by construction of brick classroom, laboratory, and dormitory buildings in the 1950s, and by purchase and use of dwellings in the neighborhood that are used as dormitories. Excuse me. Winslow Hall, which is this brick building here, was designed in 1937, and the senior class wanted to do a portrait of Guy Winslow, but he wanted them to save their money, and then later on, when the building was built, they named it after him. The next president, the second president, had been an assistant to Guy Winslow, and in 1944 he became the next president. Wass saw the need for a new dormitory, and he built Woodland Hall. And there had been in the neighborhood pass a couple of photographs around Woodland Park. Oh, I'm sorry. Is that? Yeah, that's it. Woodland Park Hotel. And actually, it was going to be used by LaSalle during World War II for dormitory space. Actually, at one point, it had to be delayed for a year because they were using the hotel as an infirmary for returning soldiers. But Raymond Wass sold off the Woodland Park Hotel, and now there are two streets with about 30 houses there. The streets are Seton Hill Road and Marymount Road off of Washington Street. Recent buildings constructed are Wass Science Hall in 1954, Wolf Hall in 1963, Brennan Library dedicated in 1968. And in 2000, President DeWitt decided to expand the school, and Winslow Hall was expanded by architect Jeremiah Eck, who used to live in Newton. I don't believe he does anymore. He is around, yes. And he's quite well known. There is a field house also. So these buildings that I've just mentioned are down this hill. And if you have time, you're certainly welcome to walk around there. We will move up to Woodland Road, where we'll see some more of the houses. And I should say, LaSalle was changed its name in 1932 to LaSalle Junior College. In 1943, it began offering associate's degrees. In 1989, it became a four-year institution. 1997, the first male students arrived at LaSalle. And in 2002, they started offering master's degrees. So 204 is the big house, and 188 is the smaller house. Was built for by Abijah Johnson and for his son Frederick Johnson. Frederick was also a land speculator, and later built himself the larger house. So I just wanted, to mention that little.
These were private homes.
Right.
They were private homes originally, yes. 204, the large one, dates from 1883, is in Italianate style. Constructed again by Abijah Johnson. It was serving as a dorm for LaSalle from 1892 to 1972, and they called it Clark Cottage at that time. Of course, the Italianate features are the brackets, the hooded windows, and paired arched windows. In 2001, actually a developer purchased the house and lived in it and cared quite a bit about the neighborhood and really did spend quite a bit of time, restoring it to its present condition. And across the street is Bragdon Hall, or Hill. I'll pass these two photographs around. Excuse me? Yeah? I'm sorry. Oh, here's a couple photographs of Bragdon Hall that I had mentioned earlier. And Bragdon Hall had been built on a natural esker. Again, that's a geological formation of sand and gravel. And unfortunately, it was raised in the early 1970s because the foundations were failing. And it was a 120-year-old building. It was just prohibitive, unfortunately, to fix it up. So Then LaSalle has, now I mentioned, I think in 1940s, they were up to 531 students. Now they are up to about 1,600. And consequently, their need for dormitories. So we are going to now go to Hancock Street. We'll see the Eliza Harding House, the Charles Parker House, and go into the Walker Center and finish up with some refreshment there. This is number 7 Williston Road. Happens to be our house. It's called the Charles E. Parker House. Sorry, let me start again in a minute.
Sorry.
No problem.
What number is it?
This is number, on the map, it is, it's number 8 on the map. It's on the corner of, this is Hancock and Williston.
Okay. I'm sorry.
So this is the Charles Edward Parker House, and you heard his name at the United Parish of Auburndale. And let's see, we talked about him with the Church of the Messiah also. And this is our house. It is Italianate. It is on property that was once a 70-acre estate. And up the hill was the Walworth House, and it is actually, there was another mansion built after that. The Walworth House has been gone for some time. You want to mention who Walworth was?
Walworth, can you hear now?
Yeah.
Walworth Manufacturing is still in existence. They make plumbing valves. They were involved with the early invention of steam heating. In fact, they did the first steam heat in the White House under Franklin Pierce in 1853. The Walworth estate was up on top of the what was called Randlett Hill. It's now the end of Central Street where Amy Sangiulo lives. The other famous thing that they were known for was the Stilson plumbing wrench, which is still in use today. Any plumber that's ever done anything has a Stilson wrench. So the guy that owned the company lived up on that hill. We might add that Charles Edward Parker lived in the house. His son was Horatio Parker. There is a plaque which is inside right now. It was on the corner of the house, but when we had it painted, we never got it back up again. Horatio Parker was a composer in the late 19th century. He was the first dean of the music school at Yale, and was very well known as a composer in his time.
Teacher of Charles Ives.
Teacher of Charles Ives. Yep.
How did he get to Yale?
How did he get to Yale?
Took the train.
I mean, he didn't live here. He lived in New Haven at the time.
Yeah, he was born
here in 1863.
He studied in Germany also, and then he went to Yale.
Right.
So last stop is the Walker Center across the street. And then after Larry says a few words about it, we will go inside and please have some refreshments.
Mercer Harding was married to the Reverend Augustus Walker in 1852. And in 1853, they left for Turkey as missionaries. They lived there for 15 years, during which time they had 6 children, 2 of which died in Turkey. And then Mr. Walker died in 1866 from the cholera epidemic. Eliza Walker returned to live with her parents in a house that was on this site. Her father, who was also a preacher, built the house we passed down the street for his daughter, because she didn't particularly like having kids running around all the time, I guess. So she began to help defray expenses. She originally let in boarders, and then because she was still affiliated with the religious groups, she found that there was a need for missionaries that were going abroad into countries that didn't have schooling and where medical attention was lacking. She basically started taking in missionary children. So by the late 1870s, she was housing close to 30
children in the house down the street. When her parents died, she and her brothers inherited the house that was on this site. That building burned down in 1912, and this one replaced it in 1913. In 1915, as I said, the mission changed, since missionaries, I guess, weren't going to places where they're lacking in medical, but it became a retirement home for missionaries coming back from foreign countries. And it stayed that way up until about 1990. There were still 3 missionaries living here. Since then, the name has changed to the Walker's Center for Ecumenical Exchange. And now there are, I don't know how many families living here. They are graduate students who go to the various religious schools in the Boston area. But in 1989, during the Tiananmen Square incident in China, there were TV vans lined up the street here, because this is one of the few places where there was still any communication with people in China.